To kick off this morning, I'd like to welcome up Auntie Ruth to give us a welcome to country.
Good morning and welcome to our Wiradjuri country, and I'm an elder for our community, a proud community member, and I welcome you all here today, and I hope that today goes well. And I have got issues that my concerns are worry about my water at home, so I know that there's been plenty of water. The problems were all over the country, so welcome. I pay my respects to my elders, past and present, and I am only a custodian of this land. It's very sacred to me, and the water and the land is where I've lived, on the dirt. So the river is very important, so water is very important in my life, and I'm sure that this is what this is all about today, that we nurture and love our land and rivers like exactly I do, because I've been born and reared on the river and land. So it's very sacred to me. Enjoy today, and I hope that all your success that you're planning on goes well. And thank you very much, and I appreciate being Zana to invite me to be part of this today. So thank you, Ollie, and I will pass it back to you. Thank you. Just enjoy the day.
Thank you, Ruth, for that welcome. As I said at the start, my name's Ollie Lalive. I'm the founder, I guess, of Humans of Agriculture. It's a platform that I created. I guess the easiest comparison I could say is we've got Landline, we've got ABC Radio, and then we've got newspapers. But in terms of actually how we talk about agriculture and make it visible and accessible to the next generation as an industry, we're not overly good at. And it turns out that people who are under 35 don't watch a whole lot of TV, but they watch, or traditional TV, but they watch a lot of streaming services, they watch a lot of YouTube, and they listen to a lot of podcasts and are very active on social media to get their news and insights. And that's exactly what we're trying to do for Aussie Ag, is make it accessible to that next generation and really tying things through to businesses and careers. And in a conversation just before with Jill, it's also about how do we just show the ordinariness of agriculture, because to people who are outside our every single day, it's actually extraordinary. Whether it's how we plant a crop, how we manage pests and disease, how you even put an electric wire across and the horses will obey it. It's the simple things that I think we often overlook that actually are those little points of connection that we can draw the broader community in. And as Ruth knows all too well, storytelling is such a key core component of being human. It's something that has been used to pass on wisdom for tens of thousands of years and across hundreds of generations. And I think in agriculture, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We've got a lot of facts and sciences, and we know the power in storytelling. So all we've got to do is do it a little bit better and do that every single day. So today we've got a cracking panel, and I want to make it really involved. So if I can ask our panellists to come up and grab your seats. So our panel this morning, get rid of some of this, sorry. And I'm fighting with one arm here as well. This is what happens when you're mid-30s and decide to go and play footy again. So, yeah, our panel today, we've got Jill Kelly. So Jill's a vet and livestock nutritionist. And can I just see a show of hands each time I introduce someone? So familiar with Jill and her work, just throw your hands up. A few of you. There we go, good. Okay. So Jill's a vet and livestock nutritionist. She's well known for her Drought smokers, which are taking the country by storm. I think what's interesting about Jill, when we were on the phone yesterday, she was saying she's probably someone who's constantly living in drought, and that's because she's working with farmers across 5 different states. And it's really about taking those lessons and learnings and helping them manage their day-to-day businesses to firstly get through the tough times, but be able to set themselves up for what happens beyond that, and also into the next one. James Hamilton is a farmer and succession facilitator with Cultivate Advisory. He helps families plan their future, even when drought forces hard decisions. A quote I heard a couple of weeks ago was, decisions that you make in really tough times are actually quite easy ones. It's those conversations that we can start when kids are coming through, especially in and around succession, but how we communicate and how we have tough conversations that are the hardest decisions we can make, but ultimately the ones that are really going to support our industry going forward. Tim Carr, 4th generation farmer and mental health trainer, and I think we'll pull on a bit of your journey as well over the last 4 or 5 years as well, Tim, as we talk today. He's helping communities cope with personal and emotional tolls of drought. And I think the big part here is there's obviously the farmer side, but there's also the flow-on impacts to community. And so I'm looking forward to picking your brain, Tim. Adrian, good to see you. Adrian's with Rabobank. He's got 25 years in agribusiness finance. He's bringing insights into different strategies that we can take and make, both leading into but throughout drought. And then Tim Bartimeau, he is a cropping agronomist and project lead with Local Land Services. And that's our panel. So I think we've got a really good mix of what we need in the room to have a cracking conversation. But so starting off, and I'm just going to run from left to right. Adrian, starting with you. If we look back at the last major drought, if you were to summarise it just in a couple of sentences, how would you summarise that period of 17, 18, 19?
Extremely challenging, and I probably think it was a period that not a lot of people had seen before. It was the severity of the drought, it was the longevity of the drought, and even people that were well prepared got to a point where they said, well, what's next? So, yeah, that's probably it in a very quick summary.
Thank you, Tim, and also thank you, Adrian. We will have to turn our mics on and off as we go, so Tim?
Look, from a mental health perspective, I think it was farmers and the agricultural sector are getting a lot better and proactive about organising feed resources, and stuff like that. But it was the minds, like the emotional toll, that was affecting families and then communities, and the emotional toll is specifically around emotional withdrawal. Okay, so that interactions with other people just become transactional. Okay, so they lose the warmth, and then what happens is communication starts to reduce, or it becomes there's more conflict involved. So yeah, there's the emotional withdrawal and the lack of, I suppose, mental preparation, because the farming community focus on resource preparation, but it's the mindset of each of the person in it that really is what carries people through.
What I recall over that 3-year period, I was still doing off-farm work, so I was travelling around, so I got to see a lot of things that were going on. And there were people that certainly were prepared, and it was not until the 3rd year that they really were being tested. Some had said we'd planned for 2 years. And I just remember it was 2 weeks before the drought broke here in our community. We were out socially, my wife and I, and with a lot of other farmers, and I drove home and I said to Amanda, this is now very, very serious. I was with people who I consider really good farmers who've been prepared, and it had really just hit them. Whereas before the chin was up and they could see a way forward, but they couldn't, and they were talking about some of them selling, which I thought would never come out of their mouth. So then I knew it was really serious, and that sounds naive, but it was something that really just hit me. We're in dangerous territory now. Fortunately, it was 2 weeks later that it broke, and what happens with rain and a farmer is a dose of amnesia. Those people don't remember that conversation.
Very good point. I think we might flesh that one out a bit. Jill?
I would echo that. It was awful, but I think we're made of pretty stern stuff. We're used to drought. I think we can do hard things. We're just not meant to do it for that long. It just went for such a very long time. Practically, from what I do for a living, we learnt how far we can push animals nutritionally. I was always taught you couldn't feed a lot of lamb for more than 10 weeks. He'd jack up and wouldn't eat. You can. We did it. We also learnt lots of vitamin A deficiency and water belly and grain poisoning and running out of hay and, all the strange things that we can do. And there's no textbook for that. So that's learnt knowledge that we harbour within our community. But you're right, the amnesia. And I would say that a lot of those learnings made us better business managers in the good times. So most of the farms that I now work on up around our area, 90% of them would have a feedlot or a confinement feeding area where we can lock stock up and feed them, and we do to make money. So that's given us an on-farm resource. And we don't trust a feed gap. Droughts don't just pop up, they creep in. So if we have a period of time where the pasture isn't meeting the needs of the animals, it could be drought down the track. So we manage that, and that's made us better production managers of our livestock, and I'm proud of that.
Tim?
I guess I would say it was the reiterating what other people have said already. The longevity of the drought was the real killer. And kind of like James was saying, in that you had really good prepared farmers who got to that 3rd year and they might have had good stubble cover across their landscape. They might have got the stock off early and tried to maintain their pasture, but after 3 years, there's not much ground cover left. And so in my interactions with producers, it was a lot about what do you do with a bad situation and what's the best decision you can make going forward and what can you do with the information that you've got. And so we were using concepts that hadn't been brought out for like 20, 30 years or something like that to maintain our soil on our paddocks, and we were seeing a lot of that blow away by that period. And so just helping producers through that process and understanding what can I do with the situation I find myself in.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you. I think one thing which I'll flag, and so I guess in my work I get the chance to go around and chat with different farmers and people across the ag supply chain as well. I think a key part of today's conversation is looking back and to look at some of those learnings, but I also know there are sensitivities around it. So for all of us, I'd say it's permission to, I guess, talk about it, but also too, if we think there's things that we don't want to talk or mention, let's just call that. And similar to all of you. I'd love so if I can get each of you, and James, you'll have to just join in, as well as everyone else in the room. I just want to just turn to your neighbour, have a quick chat for a minute or so. One thing from the last drought that is front of mind for you today, if you can just have a chat about that, and then we'll come back in a second. All right, if you want to come back, this will be a bit of a theme this morning, so hopefully you had the chance to have a good yarn with your neighbour. I'm going to just throw to you guys, and then I'm going to come out to the crowd. So that's your warning. What was the one learning that you had?
Well, just talking from a financial point of view, it was planning, I suppose. So we just found that people that were prepared to sit down and lay out a plan and try and stick to it seemed to get through the process with less stress, because they could probably numerise it, they could process it, and it might not have looked pretty, but at least they knew what they're up against. And then you had to revisit that, quite often. So it was just planning, and it didn't make it rain, but it probably helped them process what was happening, and at least gave them the financial tools to try and help. So,
and with that planning, like if a situation is dire or potentially positive, what were you seeing with your clients in terms of their takeaways when they actually knew where they sat and where they could sit, depending on A, B, or C?
Just help them make decisions, because that was one thing that probably saw a lot of people were struggling to make decisions. They just didn't know which way to go. So I guess if you could make a plan and see what's in front of you, and you say, well, best case, worst case, etc. Do we need to capitalise a business with extra working capital? Do we need to sell some livestock? There's lots of, it just helped them make those decisions, and only the benefit of hindsight will tell you whether they were right or wrong, but at least I had a plan and tried to stick to it, and it just helped the process. So.
Beautiful. Tim, what about for yourself?
Yeah, look, definitely preparation, and like I was just saying to Adrian, like stocking up for winter while seasons are good or while we're not in drought, and specifically that's going to look like people like training, on the ground training of community members, community leaders, and just people in general in different groups that bring people together in small communities. It's good for those key people to have a certain level of training around how to identify early signs and symptoms of distress, not necessarily mental illness, but distress, so that they can point the person in the right direction and say, hey, look, if you're struggling a bit, go and talk to Bob over at so and so. There's his phone number. He might be able to sort you out. So what you're doing is that there's a higher level of skill in identifying early people who might need help in the community, and they're accessing help earlier. Yeah. So they're drawing from a larger toolbox.
Beautiful. I'm going to come around and ask a few of you, and I'm carrying the mic because our friends who tune in afterwards, what were one of your learnings? And can you introduce yourself too?
Yeah, I'm Phil Johnson. I work for Narromine Shire Council. And an early plug, thank you for coming along. Thanks to the panel, and thanks to Zan and Kim for putting it together. Just in case I don't get another chance, that's all. For George, it was the length of time, the third year issue, as James mentioned. The guys around here, the families around here, good for planning those couple of years and resilient to that time. But the third year was a real deal breaker for some. But having said that, there were opportunities for those that did hang on, given it broke. And so there was some good things, but still it depended on how you went into the drought, how prepared, how financial you were, that kind of thing.
Beautiful. I'll come back. So we'll go to this table.
Yeah, Richard Tink, my name is. We've got a farm out in the Bogan, and was sort of, the length of the drought was the cruel part. We've got a bit of a transport business as well, so we started on transporting fodder quite early on, which sort of started to snowball and resulted in buying a few more trucks and that to service the clients we had. I we actually didn't go too bad through the drought because of what we were doing. We just mothballed the farm. We didn't plant any crops for 2 years, which was pretty unheard of in our area. So not even to get the tractor out of the shed. I saw farmers that done it well. I saw farmers that done it really, really poorly. Sometimes there wasn't any rhyme or reason to it. It was just, people weren't meant to know how long it was going to go for. I was out talking to a lot of people, kept my mind busy and dealing with a lot of people, so I was really busy. I had young kids, my wife was home. It's very hard on them because they're at home and they're living it. I was out and about all the time, which was a hard thing to deal with as well. Sometimes we forget about the wives and the families at home in these hard times. Sometimes there's got to be some support for them as well. But yeah, I saw all types. I saw people that done it well. I saw people that done it poorly. I don't know how we fared. We were pretty lucky when we come out of it. We come out of it with the best season we've ever had, and then bounced into the next year where all our inputs went sky high. We actually lost more money in 22 in the flood than what we did all 3 years of the drought. So funnily enough, sometimes in cropping areas, if you get a massive flood and you've got all the high inputs as well, we can mothball our farm and not really spend a lot of money. However, if we lay it all out there and then we get flooded after we've spent lots of money, we can lose more money in 22 than what we did in 3 years of drought. So that's a funny little aspect. The stock guys were not so bad, although our stock was suffering in floodwater, where we are particularly situated. But yeah, so it's a real funny one. It's a yin and a yang. We went okay through the drought, sort of trud water, but yeah, then you get a flood and it hurts you more financially than what the drought did. So
Interesting. Sorry, what was your name again? Richard Dean, thank you. I think interesting, so we're getting a couple of themes here. There's obviously the timing side of it, which is a real challenge. But I also think, and picking your brain too, Tim, in terms of that ability to nearly get distractions from seeing other people, seeing different things and diversifying as well.
Yeah, Brian Schofield, we commercial lucerne growers, so it was battled with water through those years because water was so dear. The thing that made me scratch my head, farmers who did have a chance got nothing. And the farmers that were RS, completely shot, got money. It made no sense right through the thing. You'd see blokes that had really battled and done the work and couldn't get assistance, and the other blokes that were completely gone, they got the dough. And just insanity. And, I was only thinking about the financial bloke there. Thank God for the cockies who married nurses or teachers, because you've got off-farm income. It's a basic fact of life that most farming's only a hobby. What you get runs the place, and that's unfortunately the way it is. But no, we were fortunate enough to help a lot of people through the drought. We just I've got 2 boys and Charter blokes to give us a hand, and we just battled and on we went.
Thank you.
But I will say one thing. The bombs is the Bureau of Meteorology. I'm amazed that they weren't sued last year because we were told it was going to be extra dry, and we're into the cattle feeding business, the yard, and we would have fed probably 10 or 15,000 cows the last couple of months. And they said early that it was going to be hot and dry. So blokes sold all their weaners, thousands of them, and it didn't happen. We got a good season. And now we were told we're going to have a warmer than normal winter, and we've had the coldest winter we've had for years. Everybody did strike. I've never worn so many clothes in my life.
I don't know if we can solve that one today. If we did, I reckon we'd probably own Australia if we could sort the weather out. We'd be exporting that. Do you guys want to add anything from any of the comments we've heard so far?
I do.
I'm part of the audience now. Thank you.
Has anybody heard of Annie Duke?
Annie Duke?
No? Annie Duke is an American psychologist who understands human behaviour and has done a PhD in how humans make decisions without all of the information. And that's what we're doing in drought. Should we sell, should we feed? No one knows when it's going to rain. So the way that she likens it is if I choose to drive through a red light without my seatbelt on and I get to the other side and I go, good decision. That was a bad decision with a good outcome. And it's the same with drought. You might choose to sell your stock and it rains 2 weeks later. If you made that decision based on the fact that you've depleted your cash reserves or your ability to access credit, you've got no commodities left, your family's strung out and everyone hates each other and no one wants to go on with this anymore. That is absolutely the right decision under those circumstances. The fact that it rains 2 weeks later is a poor outcome, but it was a good decision. And so there's a whole lot of science behind this and how we make decisions without all of the information. Now, she also, in the course of her research, worked out that that's exactly what you're doing when you're playing poker. So she used her science and her PhD to go and become a world champion poker player, and she won $2 million at the casino. So it's good stuff and it bloody works. And her motto is you might get a bad outcome, but as long as you keep making the decisions based on the evidence that you have, which isn't all of the evidence, it's not everything you need to make that decision, but you must keep making the decisions, you'll win more than you'll lose. You'll go home with money out of the casino, in other words. And that's how we get through droughts. But if you stop making decisions and just bury your head, the RSPCA eventually come and visit.
James, I want to ask you on that topic of decision making. So when you saw that businesses had made decisions, whether it's sell stock, hold stock, whatever, how does that influence their business planning going forward, but even things like succession planning?
Well, it's the families that actually are comfortable with making decisions, so they understand the concept of having a weekly toolbox meeting, and they're working in the business, and then they understand working on the business at a strategy level is a different type of meeting, so every month or quarter. So these families are actually rolling with making decisions. When looking at families that have come out of succession and come out of the drought and how it influenced succession, I'd say there's those that actually got through succession and came out with fear, but they somehow managed to just fall out the other side. Now that fear plays out in them telling in the next generation, you don't want to be a farmer, stay away, and invariably the farm will be sold. So that's their succession plan. And then there's those that have hope as a result of falling out the other side, hoping they won't go into another drought. Now clearly that's not a good strategy. And their succession is there will be a will that will be read and they hope that there won't be any challenges. And then there's the family that actually who are planning and actually have a vision of where they're taking this business. So a drought for them is just part of the natural cycle. And some families actually, because they're planning where they want to go with succession, they use the drought to their advantage. Now, what I'm about to say, I'm not giving financial advice, but I want people to be aware that it's out there. So if you're a small business enterprise, so you own the land in your name or in a trust, and you are eligible to be a small business enterprise, meaning you have net assets under 6 million, or this is the kicker, or you have gross turnover less than 2 million, you can get exemptions, apply for some exemptions on capital gains. So if you know that and you're then in drought, you don't have much income, so you could actually use this period to the family's advantage to then transfer wealth. So they're the families that are really clear on where they're headed. That's what I noticed with the different variants and how drought affected them.
Thanks, James. Adrian, decisions. I've just got decisions written on my page in big words. The decisions around finance and some of those conversations, like, what if we look at the time horizon of a business coming into drought or in drought, etc., what are some of those decisions and those trigger points that people can make or are making?
Yeah, but there's lots of decisions that need to be made in that period. It's leading up to it, it's during and probably after. And I suppose I'd probably summarise the whole process. There's probably 3 things I'd thought about, and it was preparation, planning, and then execution. So the preparation period is like now, and it's decisions that we make now that can hopefully help us, when the next drought comes along. And there's lots of things that people can do in better seasons. Are you paying down some debt? Are you putting some money away in farm management deposits? Building infrastructure such as shoring up your water supply and fodder reserves. Just those sorts of things you can think about and making those decisions now. And then the planning is where, if we do get into a period of a drought, it's early engagement with lots of people, with your animal nutritionists, your accountants, your banker. What does it look like in the next 12 months for our business if we don't, have that level of production? What's it going to cost us financially? And then trying to put some, plans in place that, what do we need to do there? Do we need to have, trigger points along the year where we have to sell stock if it doesn't rain by a certain period of time? Do we renegotiate the terms of all of our equipment finance contracts so that we're only paying interest and not principal. Just try and take the pressure off. And so there's a bit of a planning stage here with lots of decisions, and the execution is trying to stick to the plan, I guess, like what Jill was saying. Only the benefit of hindsight might tell you whether those decisions were the right one, but it's really important to try and stick to the plan and execute and make those decisions, because they can have, huge ramifications if you don't. And I actually had a lot of feedback from clients that said to me that, if anything, we probably made some plans and sometimes we didn't always stick to it. And it's hard. It's difficult to make those decisions in those tough times, because it's not always easy. You're second guessing yourself about, well, what if? But there's sort of those three things, I suppose. So,
can the panel help me to understand that? So, how can someone who's running a business get help with making some of those decisions, coming up with the plans? I'll say an easy part, but as you said, Adrian, making those decisions can be really difficult. How can people get support? Yeah, Tim, do you want to provide some insight?
Yeah, I guess from an agronomic or a production advisor kind of perspective, we were working with producers trying to help them understand what are the consequences of not doing something and what are the consequences of doing something. So one of the issues that we came across was, particularly in canola crops, that were sown and left too late to cut for hay or to feed, and having issues with nitrates. And so understanding what canola does in terms of accumulating nitrates, particularly when it's drought, when it's stressed with dry times or it's frosted, helping people to know that, okay, you've got this crop in the ground and you need to make a decision probably by this date or by this stage and do something. But if you don't do something, this is the risk that you might have. And so I guess there's a lot of agronomists around, there's a lot of government advisors, there's a lot of researchers around that are willing and able to provide help and help you make an informed decision on whatever production thing you're looking at. And there's a risk, yes, but the risk of not taking on that advice is that you're potentially leaving yourself in a position where you're trying to make the best of a situation you could have avoided to some extent. And so that's something that we found, is that particularly in that case, around canola particularly, because in 2017 we actually had a pretty good start in the cropping space. We had a really good couple solid rainfall events. We came out of 2016, which was really wet, and in some, where I was working between Warren and Cornbone, there was quite good crops that came out of 2016. And then as we rolled into 2018, 2019, there was this semi-optimism that maybe we'll get a good start again, or maybe the rain will come in the back end of the season, but we just found ourselves getting caught with crops that weren't going to make it through. So we had to make a decision early about what that might look like and when we should pull the trigger.
Anyone else want to add anything around some of those resources or ways to help making decisions, but actually then, who can you lean on? James, I'm looking at you, to come up with a plan and then stick to it.
What I do, and I think most people would agree, making decisions around succession is a difficult area. What I've worked out to help in that process, which would apply here, because it's just making difficult decisions, is identifying what the needs are. So break it down in what are our people's needs, what are the needs of the livestock, what are the needs of the ecosystem that we're managing. And then to actually play around with scenarios, because doing scenarios where you look at options, it's non-threatening. So when you've got the person in the room who is always thinking his bucket's half empty, you can say to them, look, we're not locking this down. Just be playful with your language. Say, look, let's just throw around a few key ideas. That assists those people to actually stretch their thinking, and you'll do the first option to meet some of those needs. And then you go, what if we took that piece and plugged it into another option? And you build upon it. And what you end up having is people buying into it, putting in good ideas, and then at the end they go, actually that's not a bad option. But they've done it themselves.
Jill, you were about to say something?
I think people get put off by the idea of a plan. It sounds a little wanky. And it sounds like something that's going to get put in a filing cabinet and never looked at again. But a plan, like I was involved with some bushfires over at Dunedoo. Everyone says have a bushfire plan. I went to a woman's farm that had 12 horses and 2 head collars. Her plan could have been to buy some more head collars so she could move all of her horses at once. It's real simple stuff. And I find I'm working currently now with Victorian farmers who are going through their worst drought in 40 years. They haven't got enough troughing to feed all their animals. They want to keep all their animals, but they haven't got enough troughing. It can be really basic, and then it can extend into the bigger stuff. But I find the best place to start is by understanding your business intimately in the good times. So knowing what your production metrics are, knowing, how many kilos of beef or lamb are you weaning every year? What are your lamb marking percentages? But not only that, what's your fetal survival? And are we productive enough in the good times so that we can provision some cash away or some resources away for the bad times? And to give you an example, I now work with a lot of Queenslanders as well, and their approach to winter up there has been we'll just chuck a bit of lick out. But now we're starting to hoe in, and we've got things like optiways in paddocks, and we know what weight gains are. We're pretty disappointed with our performance over that winter period. And so instead of spending the money on lick, we're starting to spend the money on more effective feeding programs and supplementation programs. That's helped the drought preparation, because now we've got some feed bunks, now we've got some cottonseed, and we're just spending our money in a better way for a better production outcome in the good times, which has inadvertently created a drought plan behind the scenes.
And so is that as simple as that adage that people often say is if you can't measure it, you can't manage it?
Oh, absolutely. And I'd say most farmers have a network of people around them that they may not have accessed for the drought sort of planning stuff, but they probably work with a vet who preg tests their cows. They probably have got a sheep scanner. We've got great LLS and DPI staff and other service agencies. So even if you don't want to spend any money, there's advice out there. There's people like me, there's other nutritionists and feed companies, and there's all sorts of people floating around that you've just got to latch onto. But the only way that you know who to latch onto is to work out what's currently happening in the business and what do we need to focus on for now. What are we going to bite off first?
James, you said something before, and I want to ask you and then Tim here as well. What role does fun have when it comes to, Adrian mentioned planning kind of afterwards. We're the after stage at the moment, somewhere between after and pre. Can this actually be fun?
Yeah, it's how you view anything, isn't it? So just the harvest just gone, we had a great harvest over in South Australia in Drought. And I worked with a family, did their succession, and we're talking about their situation, realised how dry it was. And I said, oh, well, we've got a harvest looking good. Would you be interested in coming across and carting grain? So their son came across and carted for us. So what it did for him, got him off his dunghill. He came and made money, and he actually loved it. So I think that is an example where a situation, rather than being stuck and thinking this is all doom and gloom, became fun. I would encourage people when doing a drought plan to actually work out what do we want to do with our people. Is it an opportunity here that we mothball the farm and go away? So I gave you one example. There's another family I worked with where their son out west went across and worked on a macadamia farm. So there's different ways you can actually flip the situation and not be stuck in it.
Yeah, nearly make it like an undercover boss type thing. Just go in and see different people's businesses. Go as far removed as you possibly can from your day-to-day just to get some ideas and insights for next time. Tim, why would that be important for people to actually look at this as an opportunity to get some enjoyment out of a really bad situation?
Well, look, I think it makes it more sustainable, and it definitely fun, enjoyment, novelty. They give us a sense of perspective on things, particularly when we're going through hard times. So if you can have fun and build like leading up before droughts, right? So in good times, but also in drought times, which is especially important. If you can build fun and spontaneity into your life and into your interactions regularly, whether that be by being part of a group in your community. It might be supporting a sporting team. It might be cooking a barbecue at the local footy. It could be volunteering at the fire brigade. It's anything that brings you closer to other people, and ideally talk about something other than farming. Yep. I mean, one of the things that helped me was that I was fortunate in the last drought because I worked off farm as well. So I lived in town, I lived in Dubbo, and I had friends that I used to meet up with a couple of times a week. Now, they knew nothing about farming and they didn't care. So I would come in after, feeding. I'd work 9 to 5 and then I'd go out and I'd feed for a couple of hours out of the property. I'd come back in about 9:30 and I'd be buggered And I'd try and explain it to them, and they just look at me like I had two heads, and I'd just think, okay, let's talk about something else. So, and they'd be talking about whatever. And sometimes I'd sit there thinking, don't these people understand? But then after a while I thought, no, this is actually what I need, because I'm laughing about something absolutely stupid, and it forces me to get my head out of farming, which is really beneficial.
You remind me of something. Like, I just think, if I think back to my time at uni and school, like those times where you literally just cannot stop laughing, and I'd say people would call it immature, but I actually think it's like life is so serious, business is so serious when it comes to those difficult times. Like, I had it fairly recently where I can't even tell you what we were laughing about, but God, I remember the laughter that came from it and the tears that followed. So this could be an absolute failure on my behalf or not, but I'm going to try something. So I just want you to pick 3 things that are really difficult to manage any time, but during tough times especially. If you just chat with the person next to you, come up with 3 between you, and I hope that it's going to lead on to the next segment, because otherwise, I'm leading it that way. All right, can I throw the microphone to you? What were the couple of things that came up at this table?
Well, we just said relationships, and as in managing, difficult when, everyone's feeling really stressed. That's a difficult thing. Obviously the weather, and you were saying...
Just around that, the win that it's a business. So you're led more by, you have to be led by your heart and your head instead of your heart. And for a lot of people that are farming for generations, that's a huge change. To how I just said to Jen, whose parents-in-law were on the place, it's like, I wonder with Mel and Susie whether there was a real change to how they had to farm, how they had to think about the farm. Yeah, so just how managing that, suddenly it's a business. It's not something you just love now. You have to make better choices and put more effort into it.
Thank you. I can empathise with that, because that's literally something I'm going through. It's not just in a farming business, it's in mine too. The stuff that I love actually, is it sustainable for us to keep doing 2-3 years' time? The answer now is no, but then I love it. So how do you change what you love doing because you want to keep doing things differently? What do you keep, let go and grow? What about on this table?
We actually got bogged on time. So we hadn't actually got to the 3, but time just affects so many things. We had, what did we say? Yeah, cool. Yeah, no, that's fine. So just actually planning your time in how you, and prioritising across your business, let alone just your personal life, which relationships also come into. This stage of life that you're in, whether you're, in terms of parenthood, whether you've got young children, whether you've got older children, it could be you're stuck in the sandwich, you've got parents that you're also managing whom potentially may not be well. And then obviously, your income source as well, that prioritisation. Oh, and rest, yes.
You nearly forgot that.
Yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. Anything else that from you guys that pops up? Just shout it as I'm walking.
Careful of the dark days and managing the costs for a couple of the ones we were talking about.
Okay, anything, can you just explain that a little bit more for me? So,
The dark days?
yeah.
I guess we phrase it that way because it could be lots of things from depression to managing family, as Kerry said, or the kids. It can be a whole bunch of stuff for why you are down on any particular day, and I guess drought or bad time will just exacerbate.
Cool. I'm going to grab that. Tim, I'm coming to you. Why is it okay to have shitty days?
Well, it's part of life. Yeah. Look, I'll do a bit of I'll do a brief deep dive here, because we're actually not designed to be happy. Yeah, human biology is not designed for it. We're wired for 2 things: to survive long enough to pass on our genes. Now that hasn't changed in 100,000 years, and it's not likely to change very soon. So, because the people that could anticipate threat the best and take evasive action were the ones that were most likely to survive long enough to pass on their genes. So what's actually happened is, through the process of evolution, we've actually designed and bred a line of humanity with a predisposition to anxiety. Now, that's the facts. However, and the other thing to add to it too is that there's a heavy emotional valence for negative emotions than positive emotions. So when we have an event that's negative, okay, it weighs on us twice as much as one event that we have that's positive, okay? So our nervous system predisposes us to look towards the negative, okay? And then 70% of our thoughts throughout the day, if our mind's left to our own devices, is negative, okay? We're designed to be threat detectors, okay? So what that actually means, so the moral of the story of what I'm saying is if we want to actually feel better in our lives consistently, we can't rely on our nervous system, and we can't rely on, social media or anything like that. We actually have to do things. We have to have good habits and good lifestyle practices that build positive emotion or put us in a position where we're more likely to experience positive emotion on a more consistent basis. That's how and it's the same thing applies when you're in a drought. So the whole point that I wanted to make today on this panel is that you need to have habits and practices established in the good times. Okay, so things like good sleep routine, a balanced diet, like exercise or movement, good relationships, hobbies. Okay. A sense of spirituality or connection to a higher purpose. Doesn't matter what it is. It can be religion, it could be volunteering at the pet shelter or whatever. But that collection of habits, right, will have a stress dampening effect. Okay? So that when we do experience stress, the stress hangs around for less and it has a lesser impact on our nervous system.
Can I ask each of you, quite high-performing people in your own businesses, or very high-performing. Sorry, I shouldn't insult you guys like that. That was my unconscious brain. No, very high-performing. Have you guys got any habits going on what Tim's just said there? Like any habits, things you do that are kind of your non-negotiables in good or difficult times? Jill?
I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I'll keep talking. Absolutely, because I'm a big believer in what I said originally, which is we can do hard things, but we can't do them for long periods of time. So there's got to be rest. And I'm not much of a sit on the lounge or lay on the beach type of girl. I get bored. So doing nothing really isn't terribly restful for me. So I try and the thing is, 2 weeks on the beach, too long. So I just know that's part of my DNA. So I try and rest every day. I never work after 6 p.m. So when I knock off, I knock off. I don't talk about work on the phone. I don't get on the computer at night. I don't do anything at night time. I paint pictures. That's probably my rest, as opposed to laying on the lounge or doing nothing. I paint. And I camp draft. So I spend time with my horses. And I am not a very good camp drafter. But going away with my horses for the weekend mean that I've only got 2 horses, I only have a few runs, and then I just kick back, I read a book, I take some paints, I talk to other people, and I have 2 days away when my brain completely switches off. So that's how I manage it.
I love it. Tim?
I guess, and this might be getting more philosophical, so pull me up, but I guess the way I look at things is ultimately I wasn't made for myself, if that makes sense. And so the way I look at my life is in areas of responsibility that I've been given, and I have a responsibility to do the best in each of those areas. And so I kind of see my life holistically in terms of what does it look like to be faithful as a worker, what does it look like to be faithful as a husband and a father, and trying to do my best in those areas and knowing that, things will be hard, things will be tough, but that's just what comes with the wicket when it comes to living life, I guess, as was said before. What are you going to do in that situation? And you can't give up, and a lot of people are depending on you, and just enjoy the ride, I guess.
I like it. Anything else that you guys want to add?
The way I approach things, I'm probably as a result of spending so long in the finance industry. I'm a fairly process-driven type person, so I like to try and look at challenges or problems or issues and try and break it down, and I like to sit down and write down a plan and do all that sort of stuff because it helps me process it, and that's just the way I like to do things. Is maybe the way I'm wired, but certainly, I feel like if I can sit down and tackle an issue like that and map out a bit of a plan for it, I find that helps me process things and deal with some of the stresses. And then I'm a bit like what Jill said, I don't like to sit down that much, so to try and get away from things as well, I like to go and do other things that just take your mind off whatever you normally do and just find something that you like doing, whether it's socialising or going to footy, and, you know, fairly entrenched coaching rugby at the moment, so that's something I like to do, and it just takes my mind away totally from what I'm, you know, stressing about at work or with the, you know, my clients or whatever, and it's just a way that I try and, yeah, just process things a little bit differently and just take that, you know, take that stress away and focus on something else.
Tim, were you about to?
One more thing I was going to add. So, look, we need a certain amount of stress to pull our minds out of one activity into another. Okay, so now the example I'll give you is that, like, say when transitioning from if you want to get your head out of work, if you go and do an activity that requires focus, but also an aspect of physical movement. Okay, especially if the movement's repetitive, okay, because it has a calming effect on the body. But when it requires a certain level of attention, you can't be thinking about your job or about the meeting or about whatever it is you were thinking about in the day, because what you're doing requires your full attention. Yep. Now there can be ways of relaxing or unwinding. They can't be passive, okay? They can't be passive like watching TV, because it's too easy to ruminate when you're sitting there watching TV afterwards, like when you come home from work. It needs to be a passive activity, okay? In order to pull you out of that mindset, it needs to be active. Yep. So I encourage people, and what I do is I go to the gym a couple of days a week, you know, lift a few weights or walk on a treadmill or whatever, but it's just because you have to focus on it. Yep, you can't be thinking about others, about the day as much. Yep, that and being mindful of the quality of our relationships, because the biggest impact we have on our relationships when times are tough is our ability to make them worse, not better. Okay, because we're at our worst. Okay, so the message I want you to take away is that we have to be particularly mindful of the quality of our relationships and how we interact with others when times are bad. Okay? We have to bank good interactions when things are good, but we have to be particularly mindful of how we interact with others when we're bad, because we don't have to do much and it can damage relationships. Okay? So you have to remind yourself of, okay, what do I need to do in order to show up as the best person I can be in this situation? Not an ideal husband or father or mother or whatever, but what can I do? What do I need to do in order to be the best person I can be? Yep.
Gotcha. I think it's a great conversation that started talking from some of those anxiety, depression, far right through to what we do to look after ourselves as well. And I think time was another kind of key part of that. I think, so I can't remember his name, I should, but the guy that founded Netflix, so I guess his career to actually build Netflix was like a 20-year journey. Started as a DVD store. Anyway, different story. He had a standing booking, 6 o'clock every Tuesday was his date night with his wife. And for the 20 years while he built that business, everyone in his team knew, he knew, his wife knew, and the restaurant knew that he had that booking. And it was this level of accountability that in the week, no matter what happens, he had to be out the door at 5 o'clock on a Tuesday because he had something which was far more important, and what he actually worked for was waiting for him. And I think that was a really interesting thing, whether it's kid time or family time, coaching the local footy. What are those areas where you can nearly build that level of accountability that is beyond kind of the day-to-day as well? Adrian, I wanted to ask you, so Tim just talked about relationships a little bit there. So some of the learnings that you could have for all of us when it comes to, there's two sides of this question. There's the relationships of how you manage your team. So the types of conversations that you guys get coming to you and that you're needing to have can be incredibly difficult. How do you work with your team to coach them through that? But then also for those client conversations when it comes to a pressure environment, how are you managing those, and what are some of the tricks you've learned over 25 years? Yeah,
I don't know if there's any sort of tricks, I suppose. It's something that comes with experience, and you don't, I mean, you probably learn things all the time, and every situation is different, whether it's been floods or droughts or, different, natural disasters that can affect our clients and that sort of thing, but it certainly, experience helps. And look, I must admit, as far as client relationships go, I'd have to say having a good relationship with your clients is really important. So, and from the other side, that, farming clients that have a good relationship with their banker, it's really important to try and view them as a valued partner in their business. And then that certainly helps when times are tough. And it helps have those really tough conversations. And sometimes the conversations are tough, and it's part of our role is to try and help people through those challenges. But, the conversations often it's just not all blue sky, and it's just not, well, yeah, we can do everything you want us to do, but sometimes, we have to try and work on different plans and alternatives and fallback positions and lots of different things. And some of that can be confronting. So certainly the key to it is have really good relationships if possible, and that's not always possible. You can have new clients, you can, new people within the business, that sort of thing. And then, our own relationships within our workplace, it's important. We often, sometimes I feel like we have too many meetings, but, that can be good. And often what we do is, if we have situations that arise, like it's a natural disaster or something's hit a certain region, we certainly do put a lot of energy into working out a bit of a plan with our, staff and our staffing levels and, what we should be talking to our clients about and the things and the action plans we should be putting in place. Yeah, I don't know, there's not one thing in particular, but it's a multi-pronged approach, I suppose.
Yeah, beautiful. So the conversation we've had so far, I'd say quite general in nature and deliberately because the types of businesses we've got, it'd be easy to get, segregated into agronomy or livestock or whatnot. But I guess given the time we've got as well, I want to throw it back out to all of you to go, what questions have you got? This is our chance to go, actually, Jill, on nutrition, etc. I want to know this, or how could I plan for that? Agronomy, business planning, succession, finance, mental well-being, but also some of those decisions that you can make, both from a farm and community lens. What questions do you have? What are the things that you'd love to, even just things you're curious about, I guess, like something of, based on the conversation we've had today, or something I've always wondered is, what are some of those curiosities that you all have? Or even up here, anything that any of you guys are curious about?
To start there, it's a challenge because let's just say in better seasons, there are other demands that come along that you think, well, I really should be doing this, like another farm might come up to buy. And that's a classic one because it's still important. It's part of the, the family business, goals that we want to expand, and we've got new generations coming through that feeds in the succession piece. And all of a sudden, we've gone into an expansion phase and perhaps maybe put our business under a little bit more financial pressure, but we've achieved that goal we always want to do. And typically these, opportunities always come up sometimes when you least expect them, and that can be a challenge, and then potentially that can lead into a tough couple of seasons, and then all of a sudden we don't have the resilience in the business like we did. But of course that comes along, and that's a challenge, and that's something that every business has to look at. And I'm not sure I've met a farmer yet that wasn't interested in buying the place next door if it came up. So yeah, that's a bit of a challenge, and I think a lot of people have the best intentions to try and prepare, but then there are other things that come along like that, and like someone said, sometimes we have short memories, and there's other lists there's other things in our list we really want to do. Sometimes maybe thinking about the next drought's not front of mind, so it can be a little bit of a challenge. So as far as how we prepare, I think, yeah, a lot of people have good intentions, and some people do put a lot of action plans in place, and they've been reinvesting and trying to build a bit of resilience in the business. And one of the things that we notice is there's probably a little bit of a gap that we've noticed is some financial skills, and that's trying to sit down and work through those issues in a drought financially with your budgeting and understanding the cost of your business and strategic management, all that sort of thing. And something that I know that we've done, Rabobank's part of our community fund that they reinvest in rural communities, they've put together a series of financial skills workshops, and I think they've had over 5,000 participants. So it's been really good. It's just a one-day workshop just to try and go through the basics. So yeah, something like that helps.
Absolutely.
You look from a mental health and community well-being perspective, I think the rural communities are getting better, but there is a long way to go. There's still a very entrenched ethos of self-reliance in rural communities. Now that's by nature, because the people that came out here, that settled these areas had to be highly self-reliant in order to survive. Now, that's good. That's good for conquering lands, right, and clearing scrub. However, it's not good for mental health and well-being, particularly of families when we're trying to raise families. So, but look, where those opportunities are is the best time that communities have to prepare mentally, and like from a process, like Adrian was talking about processes, financial processes, communities really need, it's really important for them to have supportive processes around people supports. Now, it doesn't have to be sitting down and doing 2 or 3 days worth of training. It can be as simple as having a barbecue once a fortnight at the local hall or something, and it's just the human connection component, getting to know each other, and then that's where like services like LLS or ramps can come out and just be a familiar face at those things, and just pop in for. They don't have to pop in for the whole half day. They just pop in for half an hour and go, "G'day, I'm Simon from Ramps. I'm your local Ramps person. Just want to let you know that these are the kinds of services that we can offer. Here's some brochures. If you want to take one, whatever, here's my phone number. I'll leave you all in peace," and then duck off. So, because what happens is when we get really under stress, right, we fall to our level of habits, righto? The things that we're used to doing, not the things that are a good idea to do, because it's just too much to think about. So if we establish those habits and those contacts in good times, it makes it much easier to access when we really need them.
Thanks, Tim. James?
I would say, as a generalisation, we don't plan well for drought. Like I said earlier, there's this amnesia that comes over, and good seasons, you're planning ahead, and also you're doing catch-up financially. And it's probably, I hope, that this harvest can be a good harvest, and being the third in the row here, for a lot of people, will then, I hope, that they're doing the strategies for putting things away for drought. Farm management deposits are a great initiative to have those. I've seen them used usefully, not just for tax planning, but also drought preparedness, so that's at a practical level. And I think when we're in drought, we do support, mental support well, but it's when you're not in drought, we move on.
Jill?
I think I'm lucky that I get to work with a subset of farmers who are really well drought prepared, and I think that's come from me being based at Canamble and the hardship we went through with that drought. But also, I'm a vet and a nutritionist. I work with a lot of people who on-farm feed lots, so we've all got feeding strategies and commodities and bunks, and we're all set up and we're ready to go. But I would say, especially given my recent contact with Victoria and the drought work I've done down there lately, as broadly as an agricultural sector, we're not well prepared, because there's certain areas, highly intensified livestock areas, who have had really reliable rainfall up till now. And if this is, I believe, where our climate is becoming more and more variable, if that's going to affect those livestock grazing areas, they need to significantly change how they're doing things. But if we zoom out of what I do on a micro level every day and just look at more broadly at rural communities, my little town, if we want to drought prepare that, that town is built on agriculture and support services from the government, whether that's Indigenous, disabled, aged care, whatever it might be, welfare. If we want to drought prepare that town, we really need to diversify the income streams that come into that town. So we need businesses and doctors and lawyers and professionals and, industry. And it's really hard to attract those people to come and live in our community when we're 160 kilometres from Dubbo. We've got a poor quality school, we've got insufficient health services, we've got, it's hard to get fresh fruit at the supermarket sometimes. People with that level of skill, who have got the ability to live anywhere in the world and start a business, probably don't want to live at Canamble. So unless we fundamentally change those things, which isn't anything to do with drought, it's just to do with improving rural communities and standards of living, it's bloody hard to talk about drought preparedness at a meaningful level.
Tim, for yourself?
I would say it's not helpful, but yes and no. Like in those producers that have that lean towards forward thinking and planning ahead, we're seeing definitely a change and more interest in, for example, our top fodder course, which is about haymaking and silage making. And so just the other day I was at a producer's place near Coonabarabran, and he's thinking about, well, we had a pretty rough trot in that last drought. We probably need a bunker with some silage, and I need to move towards that end goal, being able to have that on hand at any given time. And so he's changed his practices to prepare. And then I'm also working with other producers that are kind of trying to make the most of the current seasons, the last few seasons, to really catch up, as was said, and try and make up for the losses they incurred during the drought. But then there's also a bit of a compromise as well. From a cropping perspective, you want to have good ground cover, you want to have good stubble management. But that also, after good years, opens us up to a lot of disease. And so, and then try and sow through a paddock that's got a lot of stubble cover and you've got a tine system and you're trying to use pre-emergence, then you kind of see a lot of burning that comes after a good year. And then I think that's part of what happened in 2016 is I had a lot of clients doing late burning, trying to get through their paddocks because they were balling up in their sowing rigs. And then they went into 2017 and then we didn't have any stubble cover going forward in the next couple of years because we burnt it out of 2016. And so it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I think those who are inclined that way are actively thinking what's coming next. And even in working with producers down south, around that Riverina, Murray region, I think this is just my perspective and I'm coming as an agronomist, I guess, but the people I was working with were more inclined to sell quickly because they just didn't want to go through it again. And so there was big sale numbers coming through Wagga. And so that's what I've been finding.
Beautiful, thank you, and thanks for the question. Other questions? Up the back? James, that's yours.
Yeah, and I guess everyone in the room would realise, yes, clearly when there's the pressure on, like what Tim was saying, pressure on people reverting to a lower common denominator. And as probably we all are aware, sadly, we seem to find it easy to take for granted family. And when you really need to be pulling together, that's when you're throwing the barbs across, or even in some cases, grenades. Yeah. It's the families that I saw that understood what I was saying earlier about communication, that you can actually design that. So do we have the weekly toolbox meeting? Do we have the quarterly meetings? Something that I give anyone that wants it, but working with families, there's 4 statements and they have to score out of, there's 2 out of 20 and another 2 out of 30. And what it does, it preempts if there's a problem coming. I don't want to get right into the detail, but it's more that they have to score it. So if you're feeling pissed off and Dad said something, but you know you've got the meeting coming up and you know you're going to have to, as a standard procedure, just fill this out, it actually flags it. So rather than, blurting off back at Dad because you think you'll never get to say it and it comes out at the wrong time, right, I'm going to be asked this, and if you're the one running the meeting, and everyone can see the scores, look, I can see that your score's low from where it was, can you talk about that? So it provides the opportunity to actually open up the communication.
James, can I ask you, and following on from that, is that where, and I guess some corporates do it really well, but Tim mentioned before about this higher purpose, is that where it's kind of really important for a family potentially to lean in and go, okay, what we do is farming, why we're in business is for blah, 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 and it might be, I don't know, yeah. Is that an activity that you do? Is there an activity like that families can do? And then it goes, things are about to blow up, let's come back to the 3 points on the wall.
Yep. It's critical that people have a long-term vision. So you can actually see through the drought, and even the 3-year drought, look, we're here for 30, 40, 50, who knows? I think in terms when doing succession, I think a 30, 35-year term before you hand on the baton is really nice, and especially if you start early, it's really healthy. And it's having that long-term vision. And it's also, and sorry I keep banging on about succession, but if you've got children, adult children who are outside of the farm, it's important that they are included, particularly during drought, so they understand the financial and the emotional cost, because that actually generates then empathy. And in succession, if someone comes with empathy, they also come with a spirit of generosity. And I haven't worked with a farm yet that's able to just slice and dice and do equal and it be viable. So I'm always dealing with what the family believe is fair.
Thank you. Great question. Anyone else want to add anything to that?
I have a question.
I love that.
I have a question for Adrian. I think our last drought was kind of unique in that fat livestock held their value. So there was money in feeding stock. I actually had clients who would wean their own lambs and then thought, well, bugger it, if we're going to feed 5,000 of our own, we might as well feed 5,000 of somebody else's. And they were going and buying cheap weaners and fattening them, and the fat price remains strong right through that 3-year drought. That might not always be the case, but is there an economic forecaster or a way of predicting what's going to happen next drought? And do you think it will be different, or do you think that will always remain because of the global demand for food and protein?
That's a very tough question, Jill. Yeah, it's a bit like that. But you're right. We noticed certainly in that last drought, the livestock prices held up really well, particularly just animal protein, beef and lamb. We have commodity analysts within Rabobank, and they're quite bullish on global demand for protein. So without having a crystal ball, in general terms, it looks like there's going to be strong demand for animal protein going forward. It's really then hard to say what that might look like in the next drought. We have these little hiccups from time to time, like there was back in about the spring of 23, I think it was, when that little dry period set in. It probably wasn't quite a drought, but it was a little mini sort of a dry period there that set in, and there was a bit of a panic. And there was stock being sold there that, you probably would have thought, well, they would still normally make good money, but the market's sort of crashed a bit. It's a numbers game a bit too. It's a bit like the down south at the moment. They've had a really, really tough period, but again, the livestock prices have been good. If there's other areas that seem to be still, in not so bad shape, it tends to actually, not be too bad. And I think it's important that what I saw from a financial point of view was producers that made plans, made decisions early, and particularly focused on the nutrition of their animals and kept them in good condition could then benefit from that. And they were selling stock still for good money, and they were in good condition before they deteriorated to a point where we're just going to have to try and hang in there and feed. So a bit hard to answer definitively, but certainly I know that our commodity analysts see a lot of demand for animal protein, and that's both globally and domestic. So I think, on balance, hopefully that puts us in good stead when the next dry period hits.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Other questions? Up the back.
I can kick off that one. So we're a bit different in that we're limited by legislation on how we can communicate and how we can store people's information. And so I'm limited in how I can email individuals. A lot of that has to come through a particular comms, like communications team and that sort of thing. So we're a bit hamstrung in that respect. But personally, as an agronomist, as an advisor in the Central West, I guess being in the region, growing up here, has enabled me to leverage that. And I know you said personal phone calls, maybe not, but really for me, that's where a lot of my information comes from, spending time in the community, spending time with producers, and knowing who I've got a group of agronomists that I can talk to that I've worked with in the past, and a number of producers I've worked with and done trials or demonstrations or field days, that sort of thing. And so having a really strong network for someone who works in local land services is paramount to me understanding what's going on. And it also gives me insight into what's going on the ground, as opposed to, because we have all these ways of determining what's going on in terms of production from various weather stations that we have scattered around the region, or forecasting methodologies, that sort of stuff that we utilise, but really ground truthing comes through personal relationships. But we also communicate through broad emails, through newspapers, through social media. Podcasting is one that we've particularly tried and found semi-successful, depending on how you determine success. So we have one that we utilise we have conversations with farmers and then trying to get messages out that we think are helpful and beneficial at that particular time through that platform. And so we try to use those as much as we can, but just for me, I have to identify the fact that I can't use everything. I can't jump on Twitter under a LS and be like, this is what I think, this is what we should be doing, because I'm not allowed to do that. So I try to utilise personal relationships as much as possible.
Just retweet.
Just with Cultivate Advisory, I don't advertise. It's just word of mouth, or when I speak publicly, and then promoted. But now, to answer your question, I'll take it from the view that I'm a local farmer, and as you know, I'm involved with different things here in our community. Time and time again, if you want bums on seats, you can't just say, we're putting on a great event. You actually need to get on the phone, ring people, work out who operates in this social circle, and you know who the influence. I'll ring them and get them excited, ask them to speak to people, and then go to another circle. Time and time again, it just fails, just going, I've got a great event, please come, you should come.
Jill? Sorry. Jill, and then we'll come to you, Tim.
Yeah, I've always tried to build a village. So I tried my best at that in my previous job. And since I started AHN, our business is built on a membership basis. So farmers pay to be an AHN client. That it starts at $149. You don't have to pay a fortune. But we've got about 200 or 300 clients. We send out a paid fortnightly newsletter. We've got a WhatsApp group with about 200 clients in it, and that's largely self-driven. So they get in there and buy and sell grain and dogs and bull sales and talk about their feed bunks and, I don't know, whatever type of mixer they've got or whatever. And they love it. And I really love small group sort of stuff. So we're currently running Drought smokos for Victoria virtually every Tuesday morning, and they've been going really well. So I think it is challenging. We also have a fairly large social media presence, but a lot of that is quite glossy and not substantial. If you want to get to know the good stuff, you've got to actually become a client and interact with our business. I guess the challenge is now that AHN is 3 years old, is the village is becoming very big. And so it's hard, the bigger it gets, the harder it is to communicate in a really meaningful way. But yeah, a lot of my work is done on the phone and individually and things like that. But that newsletter is quite powerful. It goes out on a Monday, every second Monday, and the phone starts ringing the minute it goes out, or I start to get emails. It stimulates interaction. So yeah, it's a challenge in today's society with such a splintered client base and where people get their information from. But I believe someone's got to cultivate the village and have some intimate contact with those people in order to get engagement.
Beautiful. Tim, were you going to add something?
Yeah, look, particularly in my line of work, it's like face-to-face, or it's in those more intimate encounters. People feel more comfortable to open up to you about what's going on for them or what they need or what they think a community might need. So, while social media or research and people who specialise in certain areas of information are good for overall trends, but the nitty gritty stuff is really best gotten face to face and cultivated over these people the relationships that are cultivated over a number of years, so that you can go back and back.
Gary, I just would add, what I think works well, in addition to what I said, is actually collaboration, working out who else out there is doing something similar. Even if you have the pot of gold and they don't, collaborate with them, because next time it might be them with a pot of gold, and they actually have their network.
And I think peer-to-peer learning seems to be the piece which keeps coming up, like whether it's Jill through your networks, or I know farmers up around Moree, like maybe it was once a month or so that actually... Well, and they still do it in good and bad seasons, but 5 of them, I guess, who are probably mid-40s, early 50s, who have been thick as thieves forever, and it's that sense of camaraderie, but it's don't take us to your best paddock, take us to your worst paddock, or something that's not working for your business, and grab the brains trust that you've got, that you don't necessarily need to pay for, but a lot of insight and knowledge that you can get to help you out as well. And I think that's often kind of overlooked. Sometimes the simplest is potentially the most beneficial. One last question from all of you before we wrap for morning tea. Absolutely. I think, as you've touched on, and we probably talked on the phone about, but there was quite a few of my mates who were coming back to the family farm and looked at what was coming back, like what was happening through 18, 19. And to be honest, as a young person, was going, how good's this? Because it's going to, what the discussions we were having was, land prices are going to come down. There's the opportunity now for young people to get ahead. And it was going, literally scratching our heads going, just the math ain't mathin' here. This just doesn't make sense. And it was, as you say, an anomaly. It's a conversation that I know we can keep going on and on. I've got a couple of summary points, but I want to throw it to each of you. A final thought or something you'd like people to think about. A couple of sentences, similar to the way we started. What's a final thought that you've got, or something that you'd like people to think about as they head and prepare for the next difficult time and drought? Tim, do you want to... Oh, James is going to go first, then we'll go...
I would say you've always got options. So be clear on what your choice points are and do that planning now.
Beautiful. Thank you, James. Tim, at the end?
Yeah, I guess what I saw from the last drought is just make the best decision you can at the time. And understand that not everything's ideal, but you're just trying to make the best of a bad situation.
Beautiful. Jill?
Yeah, I mean, we've had 5 relatively good seasons, aside from a little blip there in 23, but it's coming again. So get ready, and the best time to prepare is when there's green grass outside.
No one said it have that 3 sureties of farming. Maybe not taxes, but death, taxes and drought. Adrian, for you?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've spoken, the 3 things that came to mind for me initially were just the preparation, the planning, and then the execution. But to go hand in hand with that is just don't be afraid to use your networks. There's plenty of people that you can lean on. There's your accountants, your bankers, your rural financial counsellors, your stock agents. There's a big network of people to lean on, and even just your peers. Don't be afraid to put your hand up and use those networks. So.
Absolutely. Tim, final words?
Yeah, look, it's about doing the preparation work now, getting the skills and the ability to have conversations with people where either you're asking for help or you're putting you're filling up the the cupboard with either good interactions like a reasonably healthy lifestyle. But also activities or hobbies that you can do that pull your head out of farming, so that when the hard times come, you're able to go on for a longer period of time.
Beautiful. Well, I don't really have anything to add. I think you guys have summarised it perfectly. But I think the 5 people we've got on the stage, the example of the network you've got around you, the different people you can lean on, not just when times are tough, but at any stage. And I know all of you would be more than happy to field and answer questions anytime. So, yeah, thank you so much for taking the time today to share your experiences. I think it's super beneficial, and thank you.